Woo, yeah! The 40-yard dash, or in this case, because I'm in New Zealand, we call it the 40-meter dash, which is a common fitness test used for elite sporting teams to measure the speed and the anaerobic or phosphate capacity of their athletes to see if they're getting faster for their sport. And that is one measurement of fitness, which is your phosphate energy system. You also have two other energy systems called your lactate and aerobic, and different fitness tests for sporting performance and for general population sometimes will measure different capacities of different energy systems. So you may wonder why after certain activities you can go for long periods of time, you don't get puffed, and other activities you do short and you do it with high intensity, you get puffed, and why you have all these different physiological feelings based on different types of exercises in sports. I've just come from my judo training, and that's very what we call anaerobic or very lactate orientated, and after 3 rounds or three minute rounds of that, you're burnt out. So let's have a look at what burnt out means, what aerobic means, what lactate means, what phosphate means, and the energy systems in the body. And what is energy? Well, all energy on the planet comes from solar energy, being the sun. And today we have a platinum day, so it's not quite sunny today, it's full of cloud. I call it a platinum day. But it's a sunny day every day above the clouds. So all energy comes from solar energy. It comes via solar energy, it hits the plants, the beautiful greenery around me, the vegetables, the fruits, the grains, and all the plants. And plants have this amazing ability to take that solar energy, and through the process of photosynthesis, which I remember from my grade 10 biology, has the ability to convert that solar energy into chemical energy in the fruits and the grains and the leaves and the vegetables. And that's chemical energy that's stored in the fruits and the vegetation, you could say. Now that vegetation is then eaten by us. Yes, yum yum, we love our fruits and veggies and grains. So we eat that chemical energy from the plants, we digest it, we break it all apart. Sometimes we store it. We will store in the form of different forms of chemical energy. That's what we call the substrates of energy in the body. It means fat, carbohydrate and protein. Or some people call you macronutrients, and we store them for use. And then the body has this amazing ability to break those chemical bonds in the chemical energy stored in those 3 macronutrients or substrates of energy, and break them apart to release that energy, so we can convert that energy into mechanical energy for muscles, actions and cells, actions and physiology actions in our body, as well as electrical energy, which drives the nervous system. Now sometimes we have other animals that intervene that process, such as the cows, and they eat the grass and we eat the cows. So yes, we don't eat the grass directly, the cow eats the grass, we eat the cow, we get protein and obviously fat from the cows, or meats. We know we can't get, in meat there is no carbohydrate, there's just fats and proteins, and then we go through the same process of storing it or converting it into mechanical electrical energy. So basically, in a nutshell, solar energy down to the plants, converts it into chemical energy, we eat the chemical energy, then we break it apart and convert it into mechanical electrical energy, or we eat the cow that eats the grass and we store it or convert it into mechanical or electrical energy. So I think it's important to understand where everything originates from, so you can get a better understanding of it, so you're not led down the garden path. Now, how do we use all of this energy? Now, a lot of the time people think, oh, burn the fat, burn the carbohydrate, and that produces the energy for mechanical or electrical energy, which is muscle contractions and neural drive through the nervous system. But that's not entirely true. We have in the cells of our body, as in a car we have petrol, in the body we have cells that stores a energy-rich molecule called adenosine triphosphate, so ADP. ATP is what it's called, adenosine triphosphate, or we call it ATP. Adenosine triphosphate, it's an adenosine molecule, and it has 3 phosphate molecules attached to it. Now, a couple of laws about energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only change its form. So whatever happens to energy, it always goes somewhere. It goes from solar to mechanical to electrical, and it's always converted into another form of energy. So we can't get rid of it and we can't create it. We can just convert it into something else. So in our cells of our body we have petrol, or ATP, adenosine triphosphate, energy-rich molecule. Now basically when I require energy to produce energy from mechanical energy or electrical energy, such as running and lifting and jumping and playing sport or whatever it might be, or just general life, just sitting in there watching TV, I still need energy at a lower rate to live. What the body does, it breaks the ATP apart. So a couple of rules about energy. If you need energy, you need to break molecules apart. So you break the bonds of the molecules, and that releases the energy in the molecule, and that energy is released into mechanical or electrical energy. If I want to build those bonds of those molecules back together, I need energy. So to produce energy, I need to break the bonds apart. To build the bonds back together, I need energy to build that back together, like I need energy to build a house. To break it apart, that releases energy. So basically, when I need energy, I break these molecules apart, ATP, and what happens is one phosphate molecule breaks off the ATP. So it breaks away, and that forms ADP, adenosine diphosphate, means that it's got two phosphate molecules and a phosphate molecule, and that releases energy for mechanical and for electrical energy. So now what I've got is ADP and P. Now the beautiful thing is the body has this amazing ability to rebuild its own petrol. I don't have to go to the petrol tank. I just form those bonds back together. But remember, to build those bonds back together, I need energy for somewhere else. And that's where the body taps into your fat, your carbohydrate, and the last resort, your protein. So the body will break those substrates of energy, or those macronutrients, down to release the energy from those macronutrients, and that energy is used to bond the ATP back together so I can break it apart again. So basically what happens is the ATP is broken apart, rebuilt, broken apart, rebuilt, broken apart, rebuilt. And every time it breaks apart, it releases energy for electrical and mechanical energy. And to rebuild it, I need the fat and carbohydrate from the body and the protein to rebuild it. And then it builds back together and it breaks apart again, and that cycle just keeps going around, and it can never end. As long as I'm topping up my fats and carbohydrates in the body, I'll always be able to rebuild ATP. So I'd never run out of ATP, I just run out of the ability to rebuild it, or rebuild it at a rate fast enough to produce the energy at the intensity that I want. So there's some fundamental stuff which is I'm going to use as I explain how this all integrates together, because if you don't understand those basic principles, you're going to be saying things which may not be correct. You may be saying things which you don't really understand. If you don't understand it, don't say it until you understand it. So we have ATP, and the body will perform at different levels of intensity. Right now, I'm standing here. I don't need a lot of energy because I'm basically at rest, having a good chat with you. So I don't need to produce a lot of energy at a high rate. So therefore, the ATP breakdown and rebuilding is just happening slowly, and there's no necessary pressure or on that system. So in this system, I'm in the aerobic system. So let's have a look at the three systems. Now, so happens I'm on a running track. So I'm going to use this running principle to explain how these three integrate. First of all, there's three energy systems. There's the phosphate energy system, there's the lactate energy system, and then there's the aerobic energy system. So I want you to imagine the phosphate is like this 40-meter track or 100-meter track, fast and furious. The lactate is if I want to keep going to do a 400-meter run or keep running for 1 or 2 minutes, then I'm going to start to tapping into the lactate energy system. But then if I need to keep going and run for a half hour, an hour, or keep going, then I need to tap into the aerobic energy system. Now, I'm of vintage, and in my day, back in my day, yes, my very first car was a beautiful orange, yes, a putrid orange Datsun 180B. And cars were very simple back then. They only had 3 gears, first, second, third gear. These days they have more. The car I've got now has got 6 gears. So, but let's go back to that simple principle when cars were simple, first, second, third gear. If I needed to take off quickly, get the car going fast, like take off fast to beat the traffic or accelerate up a hill, I'm going to put in first gear because that can produce energy quickly at high revs to accelerate the car. Now that is like the phosphate energy system. It's times when you need to produce energy quickly, to sprint, to jump, to lift, to really get out of the way. That is the phosphate energy system, and I'll explain how that works more deeply, but I want you to understand it. And the energy system lasts for about 10 seconds. So that's like first gear of my Datsun 180B car. If I need to keep going at still a fast rate, but it's not going to be at the acceleration rate of those first 10 seconds, say, for example, like in my Datsun, it starts to rev, then I need to drop it in the second gear. Well, dropping the second gear, it's still going to accelerate, but not as fast as first gear. So it's still going, we go, then we go, so I go, so I'm still accelerating. And that can take me for a longer distance and a longer time frame than first gear. If I still need to accelerate, I'm in second gear. And in running, for example, the first, say, 10 seconds of maximal sprinting is like the first gear, the phosphate energy system. If I need to keep running, say for a minute, for example, around a 400-meter track, I'm not going to run as fast at the intensity that I did at the first 100. I'm going to actually slow down. So now I'm going into second gear. Still going fast, but not maximal speed. So one is a sprint, the other one is a fast run. Now, when I'm on the motorway in my Datsun 80B, when I'm going long distances, I'm not going to keep it in first gear, that's for sure. I'm not going to keep it in second gear because it's going to be revving out the engine. I'm going to eventually get it into cruise mode. So I'm going to slip into third gear. Now remember, third gear back in the 70s and the 80s was cruise mode. Now cruise mode is more sixth gear, sometimes seven. So third gear, I'm in the motorway, and I'm settling down, I put the jukebox on, listen to a bit of music, and I'm on the motorway, and I'm going for the long journey. That is third gear. That's like the aerobic energy system. So after, say, 400 meters of maximal sprinting, you realize you actually have to keep going for maybe another half hour. Then you're going to bring the intensity down. You're going to start to do a jog. So you're going to go from a sprint to a fast run to a jog. And if you have to go for a real long time, that will turn into a plog jog, you know, a little plog along. And that's the aerobic energy system. So there's a good analogy of running on a track. So if you're starting at the running track, you're at the starting gates, and if the gun goes and you go at maximal speed as fast as you can, then the first around 10 seconds, give or take, is going to be the phosphate system. Now there is a subdivision in that first phosphate system, which I'll talk about soon. But if you have to continue running on that 400-meter track, say for a full lap, say 400 meters, even up to 800 meters, then you can still go fast, but not as fast as the first 100. You're going to slow down, you're going to be still pushing it, you're going to be huffing and puffing, and that's the lactate energy system. But then if you realize after one lap or two laps to say, hey, guess what, good news, you have to go for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, then you're going to you're going to drop into third gear to mean the aerobic energy system. Your speed's going to come down so you can sustain that endurance or that time frame. Aerobic, so you have phosphate, first 10 seconds, lactate, up to 2 minutes. There is a crossover, of course, and then you have the aerobic is after 2 minutes. So let's have a look at the detail of those three systems. First of all, the phosphate energy system. The energy used in the phosphate is ATP. You already have it in the cells of the body. So it's in the cells of the body, it's there for fast production of energy. If we go back to hunter and gather, if I'm sitting around in the campfire and all of a sudden a big grizzly bear runs in, I need to access energy quickly to fight the bear or to fly, to sprint or jump, fly up the tree. So that's one of the energy systems I need to survive. If I need to sprint after the gazelle, I'm hiding behind the rock and I've got my spear and there's a gazelle and I need to cover about 10 meters to get in shot range, I sprint and I throw the spear. But that's all survival. So the body has this amazing ability to break down ATP that's stored in the cells very, very quickly. So the first 10 seconds is the phosphate that uses ATP plus CP. And I'll talk more about that because this first 100 meters is broken up into two parts. There's the first couple seconds, and we call that the ATP phase of the phosphate system. Means I have enough ATP in the muscle or in the cells of the body to produce energy at absolute 100% maximal effort for about 2 seconds. So if you're looking at a 100-meter sprint, it's going to be the first 5 seconds. That's going to be that you have the ability to break those phosphate, those adenosine triphosphate molecules apart to produce energy. After those 2 seconds, because they're all broken apart, the body needs to rebuild them. And remember, it needs energy to rebuild it. And how does it rebuild it? For, say, the next 10 seconds, it uses another molecule which is also stored in the cells of the body called CP, or creatine phosphate. So the body will break that apart, and because it's close and it's in the cells, it's there to be used instantly. That energy is instantly used to rebuild your ATP. So your ATP can break apart again to produce energy. So CP will actually rebuild it, and that will sustain that rebuilding of ATP at that intensity for about 10 seconds. After that, and don't think it's black and white 10 seconds, that's just a ballpark figure. It's a grey transition. Now, after that, you don't have enough CP in the cells to keep breaking apart and rebuilding. What you need to do, you basically can't keep up with the building phase. You know, the energy, the breakdown phase is faster than the building phase. So eventually you're going to run out of energy to rebuild, and now you need to tap into other sources of energy. And to tap into other sources of energy, you need to slow the intensity down to give it time to get the energy to the cells of the body to rebuild your ATP and to rebuild your CP. So where does it access that from? So going from the phosphate, the first 2 seconds is the ATP, maximal effort, like high jump, long jump, the first 5 meters of the 100-meter sprint, shot put, any powerlifting or Olympic lifting, that's all ATP phosphate generated. Once you extend it up to 10 seconds, such as a 100-meter sprint, or even in the long jump, it's still going to be a bit longer because you have to sprint to get that horizontal speed and momentum to get the distance. Anything up to 10 seconds is now you're tapping into the ATP CP. You're starting to use CP to rebuild your ATP so you can keep producing energy at a high rate. But once you get around 10 seconds, you find that, hey, you just don't have the ability to rebuild it. And that's easy if you want to feel that. Get out in the paddock or on a track and just sprint and be aware of what's happening to your body. You find that in the first few seconds, yeah, I'm on fire. Then you go to 5 seconds, yeah, still on fire. 7, oh God, and then you start to do this. Now, the elite athletes are highly conditioned to be able to sustain that speed over the 100 meters. Us mini mortars, we're going to be really, really feeling it. So once you get to the end of the 100 meters, you're going to be gassed out, right? Because you've run out of ATP, or you haven't run out of ATP, but you just haven't been able to rebuild it fast enough because you haven't been able to produce the energy from breakdown of CP. But once you continue into the lactate energy system, means now I have to slow down, right, into second gear like my car, still fast, and I need to slow down the energy production from the breakdown of ATP to give time to get energy from somewhere else to rebuild my ATP CP so I can keep breaking it apart. And that's going to take a little bit extra time because now I need to tap into another macronutrient or substrate of energy called glycogen. Now, glycogen is what we call it when it's stored in the muscle. When it's in food, we call it carbohydrate. When it's in the blood, it's called glucose. When it's in the cells of the body, it's called glycogen. So I can use glycogen what we call anaerobically. So those first 2 systems, the phosphate and the lactate, we call them anaerobic systems. And what that means is you can produce energy quickly without the presence of oxygen. The aerobic energy system, on the other hand, is aerobic. It requires oxygen, like a long-burning fire. All right? It's a long-burning fire. So think of if you're building a fire, for example, and if I need to get a fire going, I need to produce heat and flames and energy quickly, then I put petrol on the fire, and they'll bang. So think of that as the phosphate energy system. It burns quickly, it doesn't last very long, but if you want to get something started quickly, put petrol on the fire, or even paper for that matter. You know, paper, right? But mostly petrol. If you go into the lactate energy system, that's like the paper, right? The paper burns fast, so it burns not as fast as fuel or kerosene, but it burns fast, but it doesn't last very long, you know. But you use paper to get the fire going, because you want to eventually get the wood burning. And once you get the wood burning, so the kerosene or the petrol is the phosphate energy system, ATP. The next is the paper, which is you using your glycogen without oxygen. It means you'll burn quickly. But once you get into the wood, that's the aerobic energy system, that's where you need oxygen there to burn the wood for a long period of time. So the wood is not the aerobic energy system where you want the campfire to burn for a long period of time into the evening so you can eat your marshmallows around the campfire. So the lactate energy system uses glycogen, means it taps into the cells of glycogen in the localized cells of where you're producing the energy. So that's why when you do jump squats and you do say a minute of jump squats, your legs are burning, right? Because you're actually starting to use the glycogen in the legs in the localized area. That means you're burning. If you get a burn, that burning sensation, those jelly legs that burn, that's a feeling of the lactate energy system, because you're tapping into glycogen anaerobically without oxygen. It means you can produce energy quickly, not as fast as phosphate, but quickly at a slower rate to sustain your energy production for mechanical and electrical energy. Now, there's a byproduct of that, because when you break glycogen down quickly without oxygen, everything, remember, nothing can be created or destroyed, it just changes its form. So basically, that glycogen changes its form and it turns into a byproduct of lactic acid. Lactic acid is a byproduct of glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glycogen, not in the presence of oxygen. So that lactic acid is a byproduct of the lactate energy system. So you've got phosphate, quick energy production. If you did a sprint, for example, and in the phosphate you broke down all your ATP after 100 minutes and you had a rest, it would take around about 2 minutes plus for all your ATP and CP to rebuild itself naturally from using other energy sources in the body. So when you do a sprint, for example, and at the end you go into the aerobic energy system, you're bringing in oxygen to go into the body to break down your glycogen and your glycogen and your fats aerobically to release the energy from those macronutrients, and that energy is used to rebuild your ATP and CP to stack up the petrol tank in ATP. So how long does it take for the fats to be broken down and the glycogen to be broken down to produce energy to rebuild your ATP, CP? After a 100-meter sprint, for example, if you have a passive rest, means you just sit down and just let the body, you don't put any physiological demand, energy demand on the body, it will take about 2 minutes, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, depending on your performance and your conditioning. So that's why when you go to the gym and you want to do a really heavy high performance lifts, then in between sets or in between exercises, you make sure you have a big rest so you get the body to top or its tanks back up of ATP. If you go and do a bench press and you do maximal weight where you can't lift it again, you have a 30-second rest and do it again, your reps will come down or you have to drop the weight because your energy tanks are half. Normally the tank fills up 50% every 30 seconds, and the next 30 seconds will be 50% of what's remaining. The next 30 seconds will be 50% of what's remaining. The next 30 seconds will be 50% of what's remaining. Will take you into the 90% fully recovered, and that's why we say about 2 minutes, but it could be more. And that's why when you look at 100-meter sprints at the Olympic Games, for example, you know, they won't have Usain Bolt or whoever do the 100-meter sprint, so okay, we'll give you a few minutes rest and we'll do the next heat. No, they give you virtually a half day to full recover, sometimes a day, so you can psychologically, physiologically, neurologically fully recover, endocrinologically fully recover, so you can bring out your best in your next set. That's why if you're doing, look at the Olympic lifting or powerlifting, they'll give you a real big rest in between lifts to make sure you're fully pumped up and fully charged up and fully recovered, and your ATP from a chemical point of view is fully rebuilt. But around 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes could be the case. So the phosphate system to fully recharge up after exhausting it will take around about 2 to 5 minutes. The lactate system, where you produce energy using glycogen, remember that energy that you break apart from the glycogen, that energy is used to rebuild your ATP. So that energy from the glycogen is not used for mechanical or electrical energy, that energy is used to rebuild your ATP, CP in your petrol tanks. It rebuilds your fuel. It's a two-layer effect. You use the glycogen to rebuild your ATP that produces the energy for mechanical and electrical energy. There'll be a byproduct if you go at 100% maximum intensity in the lactate energy system. The byproduct will be lactic acid buildup. that lactic acid is basically there to protect yourself, to slow it down, to make sure you don't, on high performance cars they have acceleration or speed limiters in it, so you don't blow the engine out. Well, lactic acid is a chemical that hinders the connection between the cross bridges in the myofilaments in your muscle fibers. So they'll hinder the cross bridge from attaching from the myosin onto the actin filaments to the active site, the active site that it grips and slides the muscle and gets it into contraction. So I won't go into that, but that's what it basically does. And that's why you go to jelly legs, you go, whoa, whoa, because all the little arms on your filaments can't grab the active site to contract the muscle or to stabilize the muscle. So you start to, whoa, jelly legs, whoppy, there you go. So glycogen. Now, how long does glycogen take to buffer out of the system? Well, after say a 400 meter sprint or 800 meter sprint, or you've done repeat, like high intensity interval training, because that's all very much in the lactate system, because it's all repeat cycles of 30 seconds to 1 minute intervals with short rests. That's all lactate. So you get all that lactate energy system build up. You get a bit of lactate build up, which is the byproduct of the lactate energy system. And how does that take out? Well, your body has to do a couple of things. It has to buffer all the lactic acid out, and it does that through aerobic oxidation. So you use your aerobic energy system. So lactic acid is used and put through what we call the Krebs cycle and produces energy, so you get rid of it through that. And also you have to buff the lactic acid out, and that can take up to, depending on how much you build up naturally in your condition, it can take up to 30 minutes to get all the lactic acid. And that's why after if you do any high intensity training, your coach, I remember back in school days, we after a big hard football training session for a football, we'd have to do a couple laps as a cool down. And part of that cool down is to go back into the aerobic energy system so I can oxidize the lactic acid out of the muscles and out of the body, so I get rid of all that by the end of the training session. So that's why maybe after some high lactate tolerance type training or anaerobic training, you go for a bit of a slight jog, slow jog there back in the aerobic system, get the breathing under control, oxidize the lactic acid, buffer it out of the system. So in the lactate system, it can take up to 30 minutes up to 2 hours to fully get rid of all of the lactic acid. So now we've gone phosphate. We've done lactate, phosphate, ATP, breakdown up to 10 seconds, high intensity. There's no better metabolic byproducts. You just rebuild your ATP and CP from other sources or other macronutrients. To retop that back up, it can take 2 to 5 minutes to replenish and rebuild all those molecules back up. In the lactate system, yes, you produce energy for up to 2 minutes at a lower intensity, still it's a high intensity, but not as high as the phosphate energy system. You get a metabolic byproduct of lactic acid that controls and makes sure you don't, burn out the engine, I suppose, and stops you from, and slows you down to give your body time to get the oxygen in. And the time frame to recovery can be 30 minutes, up to 2 hours, to give you time to buffer the lactic acid out, and that will be very much dependent upon your conditioning as well. And then when you get and you keep moving and you keep running or jogging, you go from the sprint to a fast run to a jog, maybe into a plug jog. When you look at someone like myself and I do a marathon, plug jogging away. If you look at the little Ethiopians or Kenyans, they're still flying through it, and we'll talk a bit about that. In the aerobic energy system, I basically have to, because I have to go for a long period of time, my production of energy has to be the same as my replacement of energy. Because in the phosphate, my production of energy is far greater than my replacement of energy. That's why I fatigue out in the phosphate. Then I go into the lactate, my production of energy is still greater than my replacement of energy in the lactate at a lower rate. So instead of burning out in 10 seconds, I now burn out in maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes in the lactate system. But if I'm going to the aerobic energy system, they have to be equalized. The production of energy has to be the same as the replacement of energy. It means the breaking apart of ATP to produce energy has to be at the same rate as the rebuilding rate of my ATP. So it's easy to break it apart, we know how to do that, but I have to bring the intensity down to get the energy from other sources in the body to rebuild it at a lower rate. And how do I do that? I do that in the aerobic energy system. And where do I get the energy to rebuild my ATP to produce energy for mechanical and electrical energy? Yes, I get it from glycogen, fat and protein, and maybe alcohol if you go through alcohol, but I'll leave that out for this moment. The two main sources will be fat and carbohydrate. Protein is a very poor substrate for energy production. It's more better for building tissue. Your body's made up of protein, but the body can use protein to break it down to use energy if it needs it. But mostly it's going to be fat and carbohydrate or glycogen if it's in the cells of the body. But in that system, it's going to be broken down aerobically in the presence of oxygen. Now, basically, what it does now, it accesses your fats from all over your body, and your glycogen from all over your body, not just localized. If I'm doing, say, I do an exercise which I don't do, so I'm doing bicep curls, and I'm pumping the weight out for 30 seconds or 45 seconds, I get this localized burn in the bicep. Or if I'm doing squats, I get this localized burn in the legs, because I'm using glycogen in the muscles in the legs. It's producing lactic acid in the muscles in the legs. But when I'm running, I'm not just using the glycogen in the legs. I'm using the glycogen through my whole body, because in that system, the body will release glycogen, because you have about 400 grams throughout your entire body. It means you'll tap into all the storage tanks, not just the localized storage tanks, because it needs to produce energy for a longer period of time. So it will tap into all the reserve tanks that have been dormant, and it will tap into all the cells of the body to release glycogen into the blood as glucose, and it will transport it to the working muscles where it's broken down aerobically to produce energy. Means it breaks the molecules apart of glycogen. And the fats, it will break all the fats. It will start to tap into the fat cells all over the body, the 40 billion fat cells that you may have, maybe more, maybe less, and they will release into the blood as free fatty acids and be transported down to the cells of the working muscles, and it will be broken down aerobically in what we call the Krebs Cycle. It's a big biochemical process, I won't go into that, in the Krebs Cycle, and that will produce energy to rebuild my ATP, to break apart my ATP to produce energy. Now, because it has to transport it for all over the body, that's going to take a longer period of time. Remember, in the phosphate system, you're using localized right in the cells. The ATP in the cell is there. It's under the fire, the flint, it's ready to go. So that's where you can produce it quickly. If in the lactate system, this you have to use glycogen in the localized area. Right, so it's still the localized area, but it's not there where it needs it. And I break that glycogen down quickly. That can produce energy not as fast as the phosphate, but a bit at a lower rate, that can sustain my energy production for up to 2 minutes. But after that, I need to go out and I need to go out searching for some fat and glycogen through different parts of the body and release it and transport it to me via the blood system, cardiovascular, the vascular system, to the localized muscle, and that takes time. So therefore the rate of production is determined by the rate of supply. If the supply is fast, instantaneous phosphate, the rate is not as fast but still quick in the lactate, but the rate of supply in the aerobic is going to take longer. So therefore I can't keep breaking these cells, these molecules apart, because I can't rebuild them fast enough. So I go down to the rate of supply meets the rate of production. And now I've got that balance where I can sustain my intensity at a lower intensity aerobically, my jogging, and I've got my breathing under control. Because as soon as I start puffing, that's because I can't produce energy fast enough aerobically, because I'm sucking in, trying to get more oxygen in. I can't produce energy fast enough aerobically. Therefore the body will will go back to lactate and try to produce energy locally, because I can't, the transport system is too slow for the production. So if I start, for example, at a 100-meter sprint, I start here, I sprint, I'm phosphate. First 5 meters, ATP. The next maybe 80 meters or 90 meters, depending on your level of conditioning, that's going to be ATP-CP, which is the breakdown of the phosphate system. Once I get to that point and you feel it, you just go fast, 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 fast. Whoa, whoa, you start hitting that wall, your legs start to go a bit jelly-like. Now you tap it into the lactate system, which is production of lactic acid. You keep pushing through that, and you're huffing and puffing and huffing and puffing, because you're trying to get the oxygen in to produce the energy fast enough. But you can't, because now to do that, you need to slow down, and that might be at the 400 meter mark, for example. I'm using just ballpark figures. It's going to be dependent on each individual, and if I know I have to go for a long period of time, then I'm going to slow down at a rate that my energy supply meets my energy production, at a rate that because my energy supply is also determined by my oxygen availability. So I'll get my breathing under control, and my oxygen goes in. The oxygen is used to break down your fat and carbohydrate aerobically. You get a byproduct of carbon dioxide, and you breathe out. Because in the aerobic energy system, you use fat, carbohydrate, and protein. And the byproduct of using the aerobic energy system is H2O and carbon dioxide. I breathe out carbon dioxide, and H2O, I breathe it out, or sweat it out, or urinate it out. So that's the byproduct. So fat and carbohydrate is used aerobically, and sometimes protein, maybe 3%, 5%, around that, not much even worth mentioning. But then the byproduct that is carbon dioxide and H2O. Now, the recovery of that is basically, if I go for a real long run, 2 hours plus, the recovery of that's obviously not just physical, such as joint stiffness and muscle tears and stuff like that, but from an energy point of view, I just need to top up my carbohydrate stores, because we tend to carry plenty of fat, as you probably noticed, so we don't run out of fat. So, I can't run anymore. Why? Because I've run out of fat. No, you probably run out of carbohydrate or glycogen because you only have 400 grams. So if you look at say a marathon, elite marathoners who run at 100%, virtually they fly. They don't plug jog. They're pushing the limit all the way through. And there's a term called hitting the wall. And hitting the wall is where they can keep going. And those elite runners, they're in the aerobic energy system at a very high level of aerobic. Me standing here right now, I'm at a low level of aerobic. Yes, I'm still in the aerobic. When I'm sleeping at night, I'm still aerobic energy system, but my car's idling. And if I'm standing, still at a low intensity of aerobic energy system, but maybe a bit more than idling. If I'm walking, a little bit higher. If I'm jogging, a little bit higher. If I'm running, a little bit higher. If I'm sprinting, then I'm really getting to that peak of the aerobic energy system. If I keep going, then I'll switch into the lactate energy system, because it can work in reverse. Rather than going sprint to fast run to jog, I may go jog to sprint to fast run. So I can change my gear. So as I'm driving my Datsun ADB to accelerate, first gear, whoa, phosphate. Second gear, oh, lactate. I'm on the motorway, yes. Third gear, cruising, right? Cruising along, all of a sudden I hit a steep hill. Boom, back to second gear, because I need to produce energy quicker at a higher rate to get up the hill. And I'm back to the flat, third gear, right. I need to accelerate to pass someone. Boom! When I accelerate to pass, I drop the gear to increase the revs to get that kick. So your body, if I'm running, for example, I may start here, sprinting, then I go into a fast run in the lactate, then I go into jogging. And I'm jogging along, and I'm just in cruising, now I'm in the aerobic, and all of a sudden, a dog comes running out at me. And I go, oh my gosh, it's a big German Shepherd or something that looks threatening. And all of a sudden, I'm just going to sprint. So I go from aerobic, bam, straight into phosphate to get out of the way. Or if there's a log there, I have to jump over the log. That's phosphate. If that dog keeps chasing me, then I may, for longer than 10 seconds, because it's persevering, it really wants my backside, then I go into lactate. And then if I see a tree, I might jump up the tree to get away from the dog. The dog goes away, I jump back down, I'm huffing and puffing, I go back to jogging, my heart rate's up, my breathing rate's up, so I'm using oxygen, and that oxygen has been used to break down your fats and your carbohydrates, to top up your ATP stores, to top the petrol levels up, and then eventually I'll come back to that equal rate of supply meets demand, or supply meets production. So there's a nice little understanding of the three energy systems, and even though the phosphate system is broken up into two, ATP and ATP-CP, the lactate and the aerobic, and how you can integrate them. Now, different sports require different things. For example, triathlons is very much aerobic based, but there's going to be phases in a triathlon where you need to break away from the pack or accelerate up a hill, or in the transition, you may go back into phosphate, into lactate. 100 meter sprinting is phosphate, powerlifting is phosphate, shock put is phosphate. Something like boxing, you're going to have all three mixed in together. You know, there's going to be times in the fight you're sort of dancing around, you're catching your breath, you're aerobic, and then all of a sudden, boom, you throw a fast punch, that's phosphate. There's going to be times you're in the corner and you're really belting into each other, that's lactate. You're going to go in and out of each. Now, your fitness level is going to also determine how you recover from that lactate burst, for example. So if you do a interval training, so if I do 40-meter sprints, 15-second rest, 40-minute sprints, 15-second rest, whatever it might be, in that 15-second rest, even though during the sprint I'm using phosphate, but in the rest interval I'm using aerobic. I'm using my aerobic system to get rid of the lactic acid, to top up my ATP store so I can do my next sprint. So even though it's termed as maybe high intensity training, or might be lactate training or anaerobic training, you still develop your aerobic system because that's used to recover. And the fitter you are, the greater you recover. And the fitter you are, the better you recover from your intervals. The fitter you are, the more you're more likely to tap into fat stores rather than carbohydrate stores, because fitter people burn fat more effectively. For example, a marathon runner who's super fit, they use mostly fat throughout that process because their body becomes so efficient. They want to spare the carbohydrate or the glycogen, because you only store about 400 grams. You don't want to be hitting that wall, because when I mentioned before, when a marathon runner hits that wall, that basically means is they've run out of glycogen. And it's very hard to burn fat without glycogen, because you need glycogen available as a catalyst to burn fat. It's like a candle. If you look at a candle, we'll have a wick and the wax. Well, the wick is the carbohydrate and the wax is the fat. If you want to burn the fat, you need the wick. If you burn out the wick and you get no wick, you can't burn the wax. And the body works in that's a simplistic analogy how it works. So you need glycogen to burn fat. So if you run out of glycogen, you can't burn the fat. So therefore you can't use glycogen or fat. So you hit the wall, and your two best sources of energy you can't access. One's depleted, one you can't access. So then the body starts to tap into protein. So that's when you hit the wall, where you see people running in a marathon. Normally people who run marathons, I say around 30 Ks, is where it gets really tough. It's where your energy depletes, because basically you've hit the wall, your glycogen stores are down, and that's why it's important to keep topping up the glycogen levels for someone who's a recreational runner to sustain you through that. Normally 2 hours if you're running at a high level of intensity. But if you're like me, I'm a plug jogger. When I've run a number of marathons, if that's going to hit me, it'll be around about the 3 hours, because I can't run at that speed or that production of energy because I'm not that fit. But it'll hit me a bit later in the 3 hour. But for me, 3 hours means, geez, I still have another hour to go, because I'm about a 4 hour marathon runner. Where these elite marathon runners, if they hit the wall 2 hours, they only got 5 minutes to go, because they cover so much distance in that time. So the fitter you are, the easier a marathon is going to be. The fitter you are, the more you're going to use your fat stores during the race and spare your carbohydrate stores. The fitter you are, obviously the greater MVO2, maximum volume of oxygen uptake you have, the faster you can go at a higher level in a more comfortable state. If you look at top level marathon runners, and I use that as an extreme, they don't look like they're under a massive amount of pain. But if you look at the old recreational runners who are crossing the line after 4 hours, they look like death walking, because they're not conditioned. So the fitter you are, the better everything works. So if you want to burn fat, get fit. And the one way to get fit is to do interval training, because you're really training your aerobic energy system to the peak, and you're using your aerobic energy system to recover to your anaerobic burst, and that's going to get you fit. It's going to push those boundaries to turn you into a fat burning machine. So interval training is a great time-effective way, efficient way to increase your lactate tolerance. Lactate tolerance means your body's ability to tolerate lactic acid, and that it tolerates it better because you become fitter. It means it disperses it better, it metabolizes it better, it buffers it out better. So you get better systems in your lactate, get better systems in your phosphate, and better systems in your aerobic in those short bursts of energy. So your aerobic system's used in recovery, your lactate and your phosphate systems is used during the work effort when you look at high intensity training. And that's also very time efficient. as well. So there are some great things. And the other great thing is the fitter you are, the more your body taps into fat and spares carbohydrate at rest, because most of the energy you burn off during the day is doing nothing. You know, your training sessions are, you know, might be a half hour to an hour, but you're still the other 23 hours of the day. So most of your energy burnt off during the day, 70% of your energy, around about, is doing nothing. It's called your resting metabolic rate, or if you're asleep, your basal metabolic rate. So most energy burn off is doing nothing. So it's what you, and the other 30% is broken up through either thermogenesis, means increase in metabolism due to maybe cold weather, means that you get an increase in your metabolism, because when you produce energy, you get a byproduct of heat. As when you break molecules apart, produce energy, like the car gets hot, the engine gets hot. When you exercise, you get hot because it gets rid of energy also through heat. Yeah, so thermogenesis is the increase in body temperature due to maybe environmental conditions, where it's cold. So if it's cold, your body needs to heat up to keep itself warm, so it increases your metabolism. Or from eating, what we call it's also thermogenesis, where you increase your metabolic rate through eating, and that increases your metabolism. That's why when you're cold, sometimes you like to eat, because that warms you up, because that produces a little bit of heat. So environmental, digestion and absorption of food will increase. So that's, and then the other 30%, thermogenesis and exercise or activity. Now, if you don't need exercise, then hey, that's not good. Not good because that's not going to have any effect on the other 70%. So what you do in that exercise session, it's not about how many calories you burn. It's the stimulus. The point of that exercise session is not to burn calories, but to change the body's physiology, to turn to a fat-burning, high-performance machine. So that exercise, treat exercise as a way to tune up the car, tune up the engine, make the engine more efficient, more energy production, more high performance. And the best way to do that is to push the limits by doing a bit more high intensity rather than plug jogging, and that's not going to change your physiology. Going for a walk on the seaside, picking up seashells, that's not going to change your physiology. It might be enjoyable, it burns a bit of energy, but in the big picture of things, that amount of energy you burn is not that much when you go home and have a donut and a coffee. Because you may walk 5 kilometers, go home and eat 6. But if in that training session, if you increase the intensity to a level that changes your physiology, then you're going to increase your metabolism, you're going to increase muscle density, you're going to increase your MVO2, maximum volume of oxygen uptake, and you're going to change what we call your respiratory quotient, is where what macronutrients are used to produce energy during the exercise and at rest. So your respiratory quotient determines whether you're tapping into your fats or your carbohydrates. And fitter people will tune into more fats, because you've got plenty of fat to burn, you don't have as much carbohydrate, so we'll try to spare that as you get fitter. So not only do you turn to a fat burning machine during the exercise, but in that other 70% of time of the day where you're sitting at home, might be watching TV or doing a bit of housework or watching the kids play sport, that resting time, your body is burning a higher percentage of fat if you're fitter than if you are not fit. If you're really unfit, you be what we call a sugar burner, means your body tends to burn sugar. So when it comes to exercise, you exercise to train your systems to be at a high level, because they're only going to change when you're working at 80% of maximal intensity in any of those systems, whether it be the phosphate, whether it be the lactate, or whether the aerobic. If you the lower you go, the less change you're going to have. Yes, you may burn off energy, but you're not changing your physiology. You're only burning off energy during that half-hour walk. Outside that half-hour work, for the other 23.5-hour days, you're just back to being a sugar burner with a low metabolism. But if you increase the intensity in that half hour or 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it might be, then that's going to stimulate to change your muscle physiology, your metabolic rate, your MVO2, your respiratory quotient, and that's going to turn your body into a fat-burning machine, a high-performing machine, a high-energy production machine, a more efficient, more effective machine. So you're going to find that you're going to get a greater energy spin-off from all that other 70%. If your goal is fat loss. But your goal shouldn't be fat loss. Your goal should be turning your body into a fat burning machine, and fat loss should just be a byproduct of that. Try to get fitter, try to get stronger, try to be more high performance relative to your life and your goals, and then you're going to get all the other added benefits of increased vitality and quality of life and strength and functional strength and fat loss and just energy throughout the day. And they are the 3 energy systems, and train them to that higher level. So you're going to change their physiology, so then you're going to get the benefit not just during the training session, but 24/7 for the rest of your life.